My father struggled daily with a severe respiratory condition that shaped our lives in profound ways. His battle with breathing troubles was not just a medical issue, it became a critical part of our family's existence. We learned to navigate life around his needs, adjusting routines and plans to ensure his comfort and safety. The presence of oxygen tanks in our home was a constant reminder of his fragility, yet also our commitment to his well-being. Emergency preparedness became paramount as we faced the realities of his condition. For us, every breath he took was precious, and the thought of being unprepared in an emergency sent shivers down my spine. I spent countless hours researching best practices, learning the ins and outs of maintaining oxygen tanks, and ensuring we had the necessary supplies readily available. Our garage became a storage unit dedicated not only to these tanks, but also to other essential items that could make the difference between life and death on a bad day. Friends would often ask why I was so diligent about this preparation, and I would share stories of close calls, moments when the air seemed too thin, or when panic threatened to set in during an asthma attack. These conversations hardened my resolve. I understood that many people could not comprehend the gravity of living with such a reality until faced with it themselves. My father's resilience inspired me, yet it also invoked an unwavering vigilance, one that felt like a heavy responsibility. However, despite our precautions, we encountered opposition from the Homeowners Association, HOA, an unexpected challenge that turned our lives upside down. Little did I know then that their regulations would soon become a haunting specter in our lives, overshadowing all our efforts to keep my father safe. The stage was set for a tragic series of events that none of us could foresee, setting in motion a sequence that would change everything forever. In our quest for safety, we implemented a series of proactive measures designed to protect my father and ensure he could breathe easily at home. The decision to keep emergency oxygen tanks in the garage stemmed from countless conversations with healthcare professionals who emphasized the importance of having immediate access to supplemental oxygen. It became clear that every moment mattered during a respiratory crisis, and I wanted to be prepared for any situation that could arise. The garage transformed into a small haven of readiness, stocked with not just oxygen tanks, but also other crucial items like a portable nebulizer, spare CPAP supplies, and medication backups. I meticulously organized everything, labeling each container and creating a checklist to ensure we never overlooked anything. Friends often marveled at my dedication, some even joking that I could open a mini clinic right in our home. Yet there was a seriousness behind this preparation. I had seen firsthand how quickly my father's condition could deteriorate. To further bolster our readiness, I devised an emergency plan that involved family members and neighbors. We held practice drills where we would simulate scenarios requiring quick action, such as power outages or sudden breathing difficulties. My father participated as much as he could, providing insights into what worked best for him. These sessions not only reassured him, but also fostered a sense of community support. Knowing that others were aware of his needs created an unspoken bond among us. However, this careful planning and commitment to safety soon collided with the regulatory framework of our neighborhood. The HOA's regulations on hazardous materials became an insurmountable obstacle, threatening the very lifeline we had established for my father. With their citation looming over us, I felt the weight of responsibility multiply. What was meant to be a sanctuary for preparedness was now at risk of being dismantled, leaving us vulnerable when we needed security the most. As tensions escalated, I couldn't shake the feeling that our proactive measures were about to be challenged in ways we had never anticipated. As I navigated the complexities of care for my father, I soon learned that our proactive measures were not just a personal commitment, but also caught in the web of local regulations enforced by the Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA, tasked with maintaining community standards and safety, had strict rules regarding hazardous materials, a designation that included medical oxygen tanks. These regulations aimed to prevent potential dangers from chemical leaks or accidents, but they lacked nuance when applied to situations like ours. The HOA's categorization of oxygen as a hazardous material seemed absurd to me, especially given its life-saving capabilities. I often found myself reflecting on how the rules failed to consider individual needs and circumstances. While intended to protect residents from genuine dangers, these regulations inadvertently threatened essential care arrangements for those with medical conditions. It became increasingly apparent that the HOA's approach created an environment where compliance trumped compassion. When I received the citation for hazardous material violations, it felt like a personal attack on our family's effort to safeguard my father's health. The ultimatum forced us to weigh the implications of removing the oxygen tanks against the very real risks associated with his respiratory condition. Many of my neighbors were sympathetic. They understood how vital those tanks were, yet they too felt trapped within the rigid framework established by the HOA. Community meetings became tense as members voiced their frustrations over how regulations failed to account for personal circumstances. Some families shared stories of dealing with similar issues, citing moments when bureaucratic rules interfered with their ability to care for loved ones effectively. As these discussions unfolded, it became clear that many residents were caught in a similar struggle, a clash between regulatory compliance and compassionate caregiving. The impact of these rules reached far beyond individual homes. They began to erode trust within our community. Residents questioned who truly held authority over our lives, the HOA board members enforcing compliance or us, the families fighting for health and safety. What was meant to be a protective measure was morphing into a source of distress, leaving us to wonder how far we would have to go to defend our right to care for our own. The day I received the notification from the HOA felt surreal, as if the world had tilted on its axis. The letter, stern and cold, cited hazardous material violations for the emergency oxygen tanks I kept in our garage. My heart sank as I read the words over and over, disbelief mingling with a rising tide of panic. This was not just a regulatory issue. It felt like an affront to our family's efforts to protect my father. The emotional turmoil that enveloped us in the days that followed was profound. It wasn't just about the tanks. It was a deep-seated worry that we were being forced to choose between compliance and my father's safety. My mind raced with thoughts of all the emergencies we had prepared for. What if we faced one now? The citation transformed my careful planning into an arbitrary risk that could have dire consequences. Each family member reacted differently. My father was too weak to voice his frustration, but I could see the weariness etched on his face as he absorbed the news. My mother oscillated between anger and despair. She found it difficult to comprehend how a bureaucratic decision could threaten our ability to care for her husband. Our once close-knit household became weighed down by tension and uncertainty. We felt isolated in our fight, alienated by regulations that seemed devoid of empathy or understanding for those living with chronic illnesses. Friends and neighbors rallied around us, offering their support, but conversation often drifted toward the frustrations everyone felt about the HOA's iron grip on our lives. Community meetings morphed into heated exchanges, where voices rose in collective defiance against the regulations that dictated our personal choices. Yet beneath this shared frustration lay an unsettling realization that our struggles were merely one thread in a complex web of community discontent. The emotional toll was palpable. It nagged at us even during quiet moments at home. Each glance at the empty space where oxygen tanks once stood served as a reminder of our vulnerability. As we grappled with the weight of the HOA's decision, it became increasingly evident that we were entering a battle not just for compliance, but for the very essence of our family's well-being. A fight against an impersonal authority that threatened to unravel everything we had worked so hard to build for my father's care. The day arrived when I had no choice but to remove the oxygen tanks from our garage, compelled by the HOA's insistence that doing so was a matter of compliance. Standing in front of the tanks, each one a lifeline for my father, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. It was as if I was being asked to relinquish not just physical objects but vital pieces of our safety plan, stripped away by an abstract authority that didn't know us personally. With every tank I wheeled out to the curb, a mixture of anger and resignation churned within me. I recalled conversations with my father about the importance of having them on hand, the assurance they brought us during his most challenging days. No one understood better than we did how quickly things could go wrong. The tanks had been our shield against uncertainty, yet those assurances were now being shattered under the weight of arbitrary regulations. My mother stood quietly in the garage, tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed the dismantling of our carefully constructed safety net. Each tank that left felt like a silent confession that we were powerless against the very structure vowed to protect us. Community support was one thing, but it couldn't fill the void created by the removal of these essential supplies. Neighbors had expressed their discontent with the HOA's stance, yet it felt distinctly personal as we watched something so vital slip through our fingers. In those moments, I realized this struggle was emblematic of a deeper conflict at play, a battle between regulatory compliance and personal safety. The emotional stakes were significant, yet they were lost on those enforcing the rules. To them, our needs were secondary to perceived risks they had deemed unacceptable. As my father's health continued to decline and his reliance on supplemental oxygen became increasingly clear, I worried about what would happen next. What would we do if an emergency arose? This conflict left us in a state of constant fear and doubt, knowing that while we had followed all protocols set before us, it still wasn't enough to protect him when it mattered most. As I reflected on that disheartening day of removal, I recognized an unsettling truth. In seeking safety through regulation, we had inadvertently put my father at greater risk. With each step taken away from preparedness and toward compliance, we were thrust into an unknown where personal health hung in the balance against faceless regulations. The impending storm loomed not only over our town but over our family's future, leaving us to grapple with the reality that we were now more vulnerable than ever. As we settled into an ordinary evening, the unthinkable happened. A freak storm swept in with ferocious winds and torrential rain. The sky darkened ominously, and within moments the power flickered before vanishing entirely, plunging our home into an unsettling silence. It was a familiar routine for my father to sleep with his CPAP machine, which regulated his breathing at night, but in that moment the reality of our situation hit me like a cold wave. Without backup power to support his machine, panic set in instantly. My father had always relied on his CPAP, a lifeline that kept his breathing steady during sleep. I rushed to check on him, terrified that the absence of electricity would lead to dire consequences. When I reached his room, I found him disoriented and gasping for air. The absence of the device that normally eased his struggles was all too palpable. In the chaos that ensued, my mind spiraled with distressing thoughts. How had it come to this? With oxygen tanks removed under HOA directives and no other immediate option for supplemental oxygen, I felt helpless as I watched my father grapple with each exhausting breath. His eyes, once filled with determination, now mirrored a profound fear and weakness that cut through me. I scrambled to find solutions as the storm raged outside, calling neighbors and friends for assistance while desperately searching for a way to restore power or locate portable tanks. Each second felt like an eternity as time slipped away. I knew that every moment mattered. In these agonizing minutes, it became shockingly clear just how precarious our situation had become. While struggling with what felt like a losing battle against nature itself, my thoughts drifted to our earlier discussions about safety and emergency preparedness. None of it seemed significant now. All that mattered was my father's well-being and the increasingly desperate state he found himself in. As reality set in further, the inevitable happened. He lost consciousness before paramedics could arrive. The world around me blurred into noise as I grasped for the help we so desperately needed, but ultimately could not secure. The storm that rattled our home was nothing compared to the tempest that swept through our lives in those fleeting moments. What had started as a precautionary measure turned into a nightmare fueled by circumstances beyond our control, leading us into a heart-wrenching tragedy we could never have anticipated. As the storm raged outside, the realization of the power outage settled into a heavy dread. My father's CPAP machine, a device that had become as essential to his survival as any medication, was rendered useless without electricity. I could hear the eerie silence of the machine, a sound I had come to rely on as an assurance of safety, now replaced by an unsettling quiet that filled the room. Panic gripped me as I rushed to his side, the weight of our situation crashing down like the thunder that echoed outside. My father was startled awake, a look of confusion etched across his face. He fumbled for his mask but found nothing. Each labored gasp he took tore through me like a knife, and the room felt impossibly small under the strain of our fear. How could I have let it come to this? The absence of oxygen tanks, taken away by the HOA, left us with no immediate means to assist him. In that moment, every second stretched endlessly, amplifying my desperation to find a solution. Frantically, I began searching for any alternative, hoping against hope that there was something, anything, that could help restore his breathing. I grabbed my phone to check for local emergency services, but my hands shook so violently with fear that it was difficult to type. I yelled for neighbors, hoping someone might have a generator or spare oxygen supply tucked away. As my father struggled to breathe, I held his hand tightly, willing him to stay calm while my own heart raced uncontrollably. "Help is on the way," I promised him, even as doubt gnawed at me from within. The reality was stark. Every breath he took was becoming more desperate, and I was powerless to change our fate. The panic in those moments was suffocating. It felt as though the walls were closing in around us, each minute marked by my father's increasingly erratic breaths. Each labored inhale seemed to echo the gravity of our dire circumstances, a constant reminder of how quickly life could spiral out of control. I could hardly believe we were facing such a critical moment when just days prior we had felt prepared. But now, without the lifeline provided by the CPAP and with no backup oxygen tanks available, we were left vulnerable against the storm outside and the one raging within our hearts. As I fought against the rising tide of despair, it became painfully clear that this storm would not just be a test of nature. It was a test of everything we once believed about safety and preparedness, and we were failing in the most heart-wrenching way possible. In the midst of the chaos surrounding us, I realized I had to reach out for emergency help. With my heart pounding and my voice shaky, I dialed 911, every ring of the phone amplifying my anxiety. "Please come quickly." "My father can't breathe," I urged urgently as soon as someone answered, trying to convey the gravity of our situation through frantic breaths. The operator's calm reassurance felt distant and surreal. Time seemed to stretch unbearably as they insisted help was on the way. I hung up only to be met with the cruel reality. There was nothing more I could do but wait. My father's labored breathing filled the silence in our home, a stark reminder of how severe his condition had become in such a short span. With each gasp for air, I felt the panic rising within me like a tide threatening to consume everything in its path. I knelt beside his bed, clutching his hand tighter, hoping my presence would somehow offer him comfort amid the turmoil. As moments turned into what felt like an eternity, I looked out the window at the storm still raging outside. The wind howled, adding to the sense of urgency and despair that enveloped us. With no power, our surroundings were cloaked in darkness, and even the light of hope appeared dim against nature's fury. I called upon neighbors once more, pleading for any semblance of assistance they might provide. A few voices emerged from nearby homes, but it felt as if our cries were being swallowed by the storm. "Does anyone have oxygen, a generator?" I implored desperately, each second that passed increasing my sense of dread. The weight of helplessness pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I tried to stay focused on calming my father, reassuring him that help was on its way while feeling hopelessly trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed no escape. The realization seeped in that paramedics might not arrive in time, a thought more paralyzing than anything else I had faced. Just when I thought despair could engulf me completely, distant sirens pierced through the cacophony of the storm, a sound that initially brought a flicker of relief but soon spiraled back into anxiety. How long would it take them to navigate through such conditions? Every second counted. We were in a race against time that felt increasingly futile. My father's breaths, once steady with the rhythm provided by his CPAP machine, grew more erratic with each passing moment. In those frantic minutes, marked by pressure and desperation, I grasped at every fragment of hope I could find while grappling with the brutal reality that life could change in an instant due to circumstances beyond our control. Just as the sound of sirens finally broke through the chaos, I felt a wave of hope wash over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the grim reality unfolding before my eyes. My father's labored breaths grew more shallow, each exhale a painful reminder of his struggle. I knelt beside him, desperately trying to keep him conscious, whispering words of comfort that felt increasingly hollow. "Help is coming, Dad. Just hold on," I pleaded, though deep down, I could hear the doubt in my own voice. As the seconds slipped away like grains of sand through my fingers, I felt a profound sense of helplessness and despair settle in. The storm outside continued to rage, mirroring the turmoil within me. Each gasp my father took seemed to echo louder in the silence that enveloped us, punctuated only by the raging wind outside and my frantic thoughts swirling in my mind. Time lost all meaning as I clutched his hand tightly, searching for any sign that he was still with me. But then it happened, the moment when his body grew still beneath my grasp. A quietness fell over the room that felt both surreal and heartbreaking. I watched as his chest stopped rising and falling, The finality of it struck me like a thunderclap. In those harrowing moments, every ounce of pain surged to the surface. Pain for my father who had fought so bravely against his condition, pain for all our unfulfilled hopes and dreams, and pain for the sudden emptiness left behind. It was an indescribable heartache that threatened to consume me whole. As paramedics finally burst through the door moments later, their urgency contrasted sharply with the stillness that had taken over our home. They rushed to assess him, but soon turned their sympathetic gazes towards me. No words were needed as they shook their heads gently. My father was gone. The realization hit like an avalanche. This wasn't just a loss. It was a shattering blow to everything we had built as a family and everything we had hoped to protect. The weight of sorrow settled heavily in my chest as I faced not only grief, but also an overwhelming sense of guilt and anger directed at circumstances we could not control. In those agonizing minutes after his passing, I found myself grappling with questions that would haunt me. What if we had still had those oxygen tanks? What if help had arrived sooner? The storm outside raged on as if mocking our helplessness. It became apparent that our fight against nature's fury paled in comparison to the battle we had just lost against time itself. The emotional impact rippled through every aspect of our lives, a wound too deep to heal easily, leaving us forever altered by this tragic loss and questioning how such an innocent evening could transform into such an irreversible tragedy. In the wake of my father's tragic passing, the ripple effects within our community were profound and immediate. The news spread quickly, igniting conversations that echoed through our neighborhood like wildfire. People gathered in small groups outside their homes, exchanging hushed whispers filled with disbelief and anger. Many questioned how such a preventable death could happen in a community that prided itself on safety and mutual support. The role of the Homeowners Association, HOA, became a focal point of outrage. Residents who had once accepted the HOA's regulations without question began to scrutinize them more closely. How could they take away essential safety measures? One neighbor exclaimed, reflecting the sentiments shared by many. The idea that a bureaucratic decision had contributed to my father's death felt like an affront to the very fabric of our community. Protests began to brew, with signs demanding accountability from the HOA popping up in yards across the neighborhood. People who had previously felt voiceless started to voice their frustrations, sharing personal stories of their own struggles with emergency preparedness under the constraints imposed by the HOA. It became evident that my father's story was not just an isolated tragedy, but rather a symptom of a much larger issue, one that affected numerous families who felt similarly restricted by the rules governing our lives. As community meetings were organized, I attended with a mix of grief and anger. Residents voiced their concerns passionately, arguing for changes to regulations that prioritized compliance over compassion. It was empowering to see so many people rally together for a common cause, yet it also underscored the profound loss we had all experienced. The atmosphere was charged with emotion. There was a palpable sense of urgency as families sought to reclaim their rights to safety and well-being. However, amidst this collective outcry, I couldn't shake my personal sorrow. While I appreciated the support from neighbors rallying against the HOA's policies, it felt bittersweet knowing that my father's absence loomed heavily over every discussion. The emotional turmoil was compounded by guilt. I wrestled with feelings of anger towards the HOA while simultaneously grappling with the reality that my father's death had catalyzed this awakening in our community. In time, wrongful death lawsuits began to surface against the HOA from multiple families, including ours. It became clear that we were not alone in our grief. Others had suffered similar losses and injustices due to restrictive policies that prioritized regulation over life-saving measures. As we sought justice for my father's tragic end, I realized that this fight was as much about honoring his memory as it was about ensuring no other family would have to endure such heartbreak again. A relentless struggle against an impersonal system that had failed us when we needed it most. As the dust began to settle after my father's death, the community's outrage crystallized into concrete legal action against the HOA. Families who had been similarly affected began to band together, recognizing that our individual tragedies were interconnected threads in a larger tapestry of negligence. The conversations that had once reverberated through small groups turned into formal meetings with lawyers, sharing stories of lost loved ones and grievances against an organization that prioritized rules over lives. Multiple families stepped forward, each with their own heartbreaking narratives, stories punctuated by losses that could have been prevented if emergency preparedness wasn't stifled by arbitrary regulations. Our unified front grew stronger as we realized we were not alone in our grief. We were a collective force fighting for accountability. The wrongful death lawsuits filed against the HOA became more than just a legal recourse. They were a statement echoing through our neighborhood that such neglect would no longer be tolerated. News of our legal actions spread through local media, drawing attention to our plight and fueling broader discussions about safety regulations within homeowners associations. Many residents who had previously kept silent now felt empowered to raise their concerns, recalling times they too had been hindered by the HOA's stringent policies. Voices raised in protest multiplied, and what began as a grassroots movement gained traction across the community. As I watched this transformation unfold, there was an undeniable sense of purpose among us. We weren't merely seeking justice for each individual loss. We were advocating for change that would protect future families from similar heartache. The lawsuits framed the issues at hand, political and personal interconnectedness, and highlighted how essential it was for community members to hold governing bodies accountable for their decisions. However, within this collective movement lay an emotional weight. While I felt a surge of hope as we united against the HOA, I also grappled with sadness that my father's passing was what it had taken to galvanize such efforts. Would those changes come too late for others? It was a bittersweet realization. While we fought to ensure accountability and prevent future tragedies, we also had to carry the burden of grief that powered our fight. This pursuit of justice became not only a means of honor for my father, but also a painful reminder of what had been lost. A legacy I hoped would pave the way for safety and compassion in our community's future. As our community rallied against the HOA, I found myself reflecting deeply on the conflict between community regulations and individual rights to safety and health. The experiences we had endured illuminated just how fragile the balance can be when institutional rules clash with personal well-being. I had once trusted the HOA to safeguard our community. Now, it felt as though those very regulations had become a barrier to life-saving measures. It raised critical questions about governance and accountability. Who should have the authority to dictate what constitutes safety? Are bureaucratic policies that overlook individual needs worth maintaining if they jeopardize lives? My father's passing served as a tragic reminder of how governance often prioritizes compliance over compassion, leaving vulnerable families at the mercy of rigid rules. In the heat of our protests and the passion of our community meetings, I sensed a growing awareness that this issue extended beyond any individual loss. It was about acknowledging and advocating for the right to safety in our own homes. The hesitancy from the HOA to adapt their regulations exacerbated feelings of frustration and powerlessness among residents who simply wanted to protect their loved ones. The emotional weight of these discussions was palpable, particularly because most members were speaking from personal experiences akin to mine, marked by profound sorrow and an urge to instigate change. Our movement became a platform for raising awareness about how stringent policies could inadvertently lead to devastating consequences, challenging us all to rethink those boundaries. Yet, even as we confronted these larger issues, my heart carried a lingering sorrow. Each time we discussed reforms or policy changes in those meetings, it was impossible not to feel the shame of having lost my father to such neglectful oversight. His memory infused every word spoken and every argument made. I yearned for his legacy to inspire genuine progress rather than merely serve as a somber footnote in legislation. Ultimately, our fight revealed a harsh truth. While advancements in safety are often driven by well-meaning intentions, they can be harmful when prioritizing regulation over individual circumstances. Moving forward, I knew it would be imperative for our community not only to advocate for policy change, but also for humanity, ensuring that in the pursuit of security through governance, we never forget the essential human element behind every rule. As we forged ahead together in this battle for accountability, I held on tightly to that principle. It would be my father's legacy and our shared mission going forth. As our community continued to grapple with the aftermath of my father's death, it became clear that the ramifications of this tragedy would extend far beyond our individual family. The lawsuits against the HOA were not merely legal actions. They represented a crucial turning point in how residents perceived their rights and responsibilities within the framework of community governance. As we pursued justice, the discussions surrounding potential changes to HOA policies gained momentum, urging a reevaluation of regulations that had previously gone unchallenged. In community meetings, residents passionately voiced their demands for reform, advocating for policies that would prioritize safety and health over bureaucratic compliance. Many spoke about their own experiences with emergencies, highlighting how the current rules had left them feeling vulnerable and unprotected. The shared grief fostered a sense of solidarity that transformed our collective sorrow into a powerful force for change. This newfound awareness also sparked broader conversations about governance and accountability within the community. People began to question who truly held authority over personal safety. Were the rules designed to protect us or to control us? As these discussions unfolded, it was evident that many residents felt empowered to take an active role in shaping policies that directly impacted their lives. I realized that my father's legacy was becoming intertwined with our fight for change. His memory served as a catalyst for this awakening. Families who had remained silent began to speak out, sharing their stories and experiences in an effort to ensure such tragedies would not be repeated. This transformation was both inspiring and bittersweet, as it illuminated how much we had lost yet also demonstrated our resilience as a community. In time, we hope to see specific alterations in HOA regulations, changes that would allow families like mine to maintain necessary safety measures without fear of retribution. The fight for accountability became not only about securing justice for my father, but also about fostering an environment where compassion triumphed over compliance. As we pressed forward, I held on to the belief that this collective movement could lead to meaningful reform in our community, one that honors individual rights while ensuring safety and well-being for all residents. Ultimately, it was about creating a legacy built on awareness and empathy, transforming our tragedy into a foundation for future generations to thrive without fear of neglect or loss. Through these efforts, I hoped we could forge a path toward a more compassionate community where everyone's health and safety were recognized as fundamental rights, ensuring no family would ever have to endure what we had faced again.